The government's new terrorism suppression control orders bill receives its first reading in Parliament today, so that's the beginning of the political process. Now, we looked at this on Breakfast last week with Andrew Geddes and with the Minister himself, Andrew Little, and as we discussed, the legislation's aimed at meeting the challenge presented by people like Mark Taylor, who was fighting for ISIS in the Middle East prior to being imprisoned by the Kurds in Syria. Now, given the situation in Syria, there does seem to be an increasing likelihood of Taylor arriving back in New Zealand, and that's seen the government scrambling somewhat to ensure our laws are fit for purpose. Are they? Is this the right response? According to foreign policy and global security expert Robert Patman, the government should have acted decisively in the case of Mark Taylor long before now. The University of Otago's Professor Patman joins us now live from Dunedin. Morning, Robert. It's nice to have you with us, as it always is. Tell me about your assessment of how the government is handling this issue. Let's talk about how long it's taken them to respond meaningfully to Mark Taylor.
Well, it should be recalled in early March, the Kurds, who then had much of the ISIS militants under detention in northern Syria, approached the New Zealand government and said that New Zealand should look at taking Mark Taylor off their hands. And the response from the foreign minister, the opposition leader, a number of people, was that we don't basically want Mark Taylor back in this country. And he was told that if he could make his way to the consulate in Ankara in Turkey, then we could take him back from there. It was a slightly, wait and see approach. We were certainly taking responsibility for the fact he was a New Zealand citizen, but it didn't show, I think, the urgency that was required. We'd be quite clear about this. This person was working for possibly the most extreme terrorist organisation in history, which had murdered in the most hideous fashion Kurds, Syrians and Iraqis. And we should know, particularly after the experience of Christchurch, just what it feels like when innocent people are killed in such an awful fashion. So I just think we were a bit slow off the mark, but I welcome what's happened recently.
Yes, so 7 months on, we now have the government's new terrorism suppression control orders bill going through the Parliament today. We had a colleague of yours on, Andrew Geddes, last week, saying he doesn't think this bill, albeit a requisite belated response, still has it right yet. Still has it right. Do you think it's got it right?
No, I think the government is naturally concerned, as I understand it, and I defer to Andrew's superior knowledge here as an international lawyer, and I'm not, but from what I can gather, at the moment, given the fact it would take some time to build a case, because what Mr. Taylor has been doing for ISIS remains to be fully seen. He claims he was just a bit player, but we don't know that. And so that would take some time. The difficulty is that under the current act, which was basically, I think, put together in 2002, a long time ago, that was designed to deal with the possibility of people coming into the country, such as Al-Qaeda operatives. Now we're in a different situation where someone's returning, a New Zealander returning from ISIS, and I think the fear was, and I think the government's right here, that it may be difficult to immediately detain that person under the terms of reference of the current act. And so this idea of a holding order whereby someone can be taken out of circulation, they can be effectively monitored, and before the case can be made and the evidence assembled. So I think, the government's got to look at, I know there's been criticisms of this about the possible infringement of human rights, but I think you have to look at it the other way around to some degree also. The public will be gravely concerned if someone like Mark Taylor got off the plane, couldn't be detained under our laws and was free to go about his business while the government was building a case.
I'm really interested in your use of the phrase someone like Mark Taylor, and I see it in those terms too, but we have characterised this man as something of a fool, and he's called the bumbling jihadi, which I don't think is a phrase we should use in good faith, because as you say, he joined ISIS. He went all that way to join ISIS, and I just wonder if we have been casual, almost nonchalant in our response to him.
Well, I agree with what you're saying, and I do think we've been nonchalant and casual. I mean, let's be quite clear about this, John. New Zealand, and this is a bipartisan point, national as well as Labour-led governments would take this view, we critically depend on a rules-based order, but we have responsibilities to uphold the rules. We were part of an anti-ISIS coalition. That's why we had 143 military personnel in Iraq, and we still have 95 there, training forces to combat ISIS. Now, given those responsibilities, I thought our response was bordering on the populist when it first became clear that the Kurds couldn't hold someone like Mark Taylor for too long. And I don't buy into the view that he's a bumbling fool. And, I think this idea that by bringing him back quickly would be a compassionate act is completely wrong. In fact, quite the reverse. It would show that we're businesslike and professional in dealing with people who've joined one of the most extreme and barbaric organisations around. And the fact that we hesitated and acted, I think, in anything but like a business-like manner, it wasn't consistent with our support for the international rules-based order.
So justice must not only be done; it must be seen to be done.
The fact is, if a terrorist is released or appears to be released from custody, it's our business to make sure that person faces the full rigour of the law. And since he's a New Zealand citizen, he must face justice in this country.
Professor Robert Patman from the University of Otago, we really appreciate you joining us this morning, as we always appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks, Robert. We're very grateful.
Thanks, John.